My name is John Clingan. I'm a product manager at Red Hat. So I manage some of our kind of the new app platforms around WildFly Swarm and Vertex and so on, along with being pretty active in the MicroProfile community and a long-time Java EE person myself.
My name's Ken Finnigan. I'm the lead of WildFly Swarm, and I'm also actively involved in the MicroProfile community, but more from the technical side than the manager side that he is.
Okay, so some questions, I guess. How many of you have attended the talk Ken and I had earlier today about WildFly Swarm and MicroProfile? Okay, there's not too much overlap overall. And how many of you, before coming to the conference, had heard of MicroProfile? Okay, good. And let's see, Java EE developers. How many Java EE developers do we have? Okay, good. So mostly, it looks like, I won't ask the other questions, mostly a developer audience, which is good. So I'll go ahead and get started. There are some slides that overlap with the earlier presentation, but not all of it. So for the people that were at the last one, there is some new content. All right, so in a prior life, I was actively involved in Java EE, more closely in the sense that I was a product manager of the reference implementation and of Java EE itself. And so I actually helped kind of manage some of these releases. And as you can kind of see from this slide, right, Java EE started out with a pretty quick cadence, but as the platform matured, the cadence slowed. And that's because it was becoming a mature platform. And it's mature in the context of developing traditional Java EE applications. You might call them monoliths, right? You don't have to write monoliths with Java EE. You can actually write microservices with Java EE. But in terms of the traditional development and deployment infrastructure, the cadence has slowed down as the platform has matured. But as that happened, of course, we also have an acceleration of microservices, right? And the idea of containerization and clouds and mobile and taking these large monolithic applications and breaking them down into more agile microservices. This whole thing is happening, and so the vendors, you can see some of them listed here. Most of the major vendors basically started going out and experimenting with microservices with their own implementations. So Red Hat, we kind of went out and started doing experimentations around how do we make WildFly, the traditional Java EE application server, more oriented toward this new style of microservices development. And all the other vendors were basically doing the same thing. But we all came from a common Java EE community, right? We're all used to, just out of tradition and the way things have been for nearly 2 decades, we've always worked together with defining APIs and specifications. And we saw ourselves each kind of going, because we were each trying to adapt our runtimes to more of a microservices type of development, we kind of had a set of communities, each following our individual ways of doing that. And we thought, let's not risk kind of splitting the traditional Java EE community that's also interested in doing microservices into these kind of separate product-oriented communities. So we decided, let's just all collaborate in one place. Let's just do what we did with Java EE, but do it with microservices. And that's where we decided, well, let's found the Eclipse Foundation. Not found the Eclipse Foundation, a project under the Eclipse Foundation called Eclipse MicroProfile. And now keep in mind that MicroProfile is not a standards organization, right? What we're trying to do is put technology around microservices in your hands, the traditional Java EE developers' hands, as quickly as possible. So we're not trying to go out there and quickly standardize things, and that's what the JCP is for, the Java Community Process, where Java EE is defined. And we don't want to go out there and just try and innovate in the standards organization, right? That really doesn't work. So we're treating MicroProfile more as just an open source project, an open source community, and we wanted a neutral place for all of us to kind of come together. There's no one vendor that has, or even individual that has more say than another, right? So hence we have Eclipse MicroProfile. And they had processes in place, whether they're legal processes or basically product processes for the way you bring things to production or to release, I should say. They own the trademark. They accept the Apache license, which is what we're doing the Eclipse MicroProfile under. So it was a really good fit for us to actually go out and do some really innovative things. So the question is, how do we pave a path from traditional Java EE to a microservices development environment? So one thing we want to do is kind of get started with some of the Java EE technologies that are relevant for microservices. And we basically started out with CDI, JAX-RS, and JSON processing. And maybe we could have pulled in more, but the idea is we wanted to start with this very small set that was familiar to existing Java EE developers that we could quickly bring, put in their hands, and there's already a lot of developers that know these things, right? So we wanted to leverage Java EE to begin with to just kind of get things kicked off and moving pretty quickly. And now we're also moving forward as we head towards Java EE 8, which Oracle announced I think is going to happen sometime in July, maybe by Java 1, right? Even with the Glassfish implementation for Java EE 8. And Java EE 8 updates some of these specifications, right? So we'll get a more current version of CDI, JAX-RS, and JSON processing into MicroProfile. And we may even add JSON binding, right? Which basically takes JSON representations of objects and maps them to a Java object. So this kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of kind of how, if you have a Java EE background, how MicroProfile can, begin to, you can start pretty easily, right? The second thing we're doing is some organic innovation. So we're just not taking Java EE technologies and basically say, here, now it's called MicroProfile. We're actually working together as a community to go out and define specifications that are relevant for microservices, right? And the things that are kind of, you might say, near the top of the list right now in terms of being ready, and I have a roadmap slide, so our configuration. How do I separate a microservice from its configuration? How do I externalize the configuration from the service? So that's a technology. JWT token exchange. The idea here is we all agree on what metadata that's in the token that we agree that we should all support, because there's a lot of metadata that you can provide, or properties. Health check. So if your service is running in the cloud environments are able to detect, if you kind of provide the data, if your service is healthy. If it's not healthy, it'll basically kill the container in a containerized environment like OpenShift and restart it. But what health check does is it lets your application provide basically a way to tell the runtime whether or not you're healthy. Maybe you're healthy as a service, but the database you're talking to isn't healthy, or the connection isn't healthy. So you know what? I'll just say I'm unhealthy. Let the container or the runtime restart me and reconnect to the database, right? It's a real simple solution in a lot of cases, right? Reboot. And then fault tolerance, right? That's things like circuit breakers and bulkheads. These are things that we're thinking about as well, standardizing, or well, not standardizing per se, but kind of collaborating around and coming up with a common specification. And with all these specifications, we're planning or expecting multiple implementations. So with configuration, IBM's working on one. There's Apache TomEE. There's an implementation in Geronimo, yep. And there's a fourth one I can never remember. What was the fourth one?
It's the one we're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
There we go.
Yeah. So, all right. A third way that we're kind of paving the path. So I talked about leveraging some existing EE technologies, doing some organic innovation, but leveraging basically the brain power of the community, right? And collaborating. It's what open source is all about, and it's what Red Hat does extremely well. So we're collaborating really on specifications. Right now, actually, most of these specifications that are being implemented are happening not as an Eclipse project, but just in other areas. but the MicroProfile is just kind of hosting the specifications. But we may actually have implementations. We may decide to collaborate on certain technologies on an implementation in MicroProfile and have it be an Eclipse project. But at least for where we're at right now, most of them just seem to be oriented around specifications. And, and we want to encourage multiple implementations, right? Just like we have with Java EE, right? There's multiple EJB containers, servlet engines, and so on. And once we get to this point where we think these specifications are mature, we have multiple implementations, and people are basically realizing that hey, this thing is getting pretty mature, then we'll basically propose it as a standard, right? Most likely through the JCP, right? Say, hey, let's do a new JSR, and hopefully that'll also collapse the standardization process in the JCP, because we've done a lot of the front work already kind of in the community. All right, so again, the idea is to put features in developers' hands quickly. So typically with Java EE, when you go from an idea, what should be in, a JSR proposal for what should be in Java EE, to an actual implementation, it can take 3-4 years, right? I kind of gave you an idea with that first slide. But what we want to do, again, is collaborate and open source around, implementations and put them in developers' hands, and you can try them out. Whether you just do it in development, production, it's kind of up to you, right? But we get the feedback, and you get to, you get to try it out much sooner than you otherwise would. So that just gives you an idea. And we'd like to have somewhere between 2 and 4 releases per year. We haven't formalized it per se, but you'll see in the roadmap that we're kind of trying to stay close to that. So just to give you an idea of the roadmap, on the left-hand side here, well, it's the only side right now, is the actual schedule, right, that we're kind of thinking about. So in Q2, we'll have a MicroProfile 1.1, in Q3, a 1.2, and in Q4, a 2.0. And if you look now at the right-hand side, this is the feature backlog, right? This is all the features that people in the community are interested in working on. So it wasn't just one person deciding, these are all the things we need. It's just like someone comes in, they're interested, they say, you know what, I think we should be doing monitoring. Maybe we should look at open tracing, right, for tracing performance across multiple instances of multiple microservices. So there's lots of people with different ideas about what they think should be in MicroProfile. So the one thing we know for sure, we have live Hangouts, right? Every other week, anyone can join. The schedule is on a calendar that you can go take a look at. If you go look at the MicroProfile project in the Eclipse Foundation, you'll see a calendar. And we have live Hangouts on this configuration spec. We have a live Hangout on the fault tolerance spec. And we have a live Hangout every other week that's just kind of an umbrella meeting where we talk about roadmaps or any specific item that needs to be talked about, as well as kind of just the roadmap in general and status of a lot of these things. So we feel pretty confident that configuration is done as the initial spec. And there's, like I mentioned, 4 implementations that people are working on. And as you go down this list, it's kind of, generally speaking, the things that are higher in the list or more prepared, closer to actually being a spec that we think is close enough to, go build implementations around. And the further down you go is, further away from actually having something implemented. And if you look at the bottom of the list, that's where I have those Java EE8 technologies. And we expect those to actually map up to the MicroProfile 2.0, right? So that's the one case here where it's not just a pure backlog idea, but we know that once we get to the Java EE8 technologies and we rev to the more recent versions of the Java EE specs, that's probably when we'll do a major revision change of MicroProfile itself. Because the way it basically works is these specifications, these features are basically being built on CDI 1.1. Right, so if we're going to do right now, a circuit breaker spec, it'll be based on CDI 1.1, right? So once we get to MicroProfile 2.0, we expect that we'll update those specs if they need to be updated to include CDI 2.0 features, right? So practical usage of MicroProfile. So does that mean that if I want to use MicroProfile, I just use only CDI, only JAX-RS, and JSON processing right now? And the answer is no. Even as we add the configuration and some of these other technologies, does that mean to say I'm using MicroProfile that I'm using only those things? And the answer is no. It's basically, if you look at most of the vendors, they're app server vendors, right? Java EE app server vendors. So what we're really going to be doing is taking our existing app server implementations and extending them with implementations of the MicroProfile specs, right? And maybe 5 years, I'm just talking kind of very abstractly, if we think that MicroProfile has enough functionality to stand on its own, maybe it'll stand on its own, right? But right now the idea is just, we're really kind of extending the way we develop with Java EE today with these specifications. And of course, the other practical use is, just like we do today, we use third-party frameworks on top of our app servers, when we use our apps, when we write our apps. So, you're going to have a combination to write an app, some Java EE technologies, some MicroProfile technologies, and maybe some open source frameworks as well, right? And the way we deliver that is with actually MicroProfile itself. Sorry, is with the WildFly Swarm itself, right? So that's Red Hat's delivery vehicle for MicroProfile technologies, as well as, of course, some Java EE technologies. And all right, I'm going to hand over to Ken.
Okay, so in terms of how we work with MicroProfile, all the discussions happen on Google Group. And from past experience over the last 6 months, I know for people coming in fresh and new, it can be quite daunting because there can be quite a lot of traffic in the Google Group, and it can be on a very varied set of topics. So it can be a little difficult to get the hang of what's being discussed where and the flow of things. But once you do, it's not too bad. And we certainly don't expect anyone to be, or everyone contributing to every thread that happens on Google Group. There might be particular areas of focus you have. And that's the kind of thing you're looking for in the Google Group, and you kind of ignore everything else. And the idea with the Google Group and discussions and MicroProfile as a whole is that we reach consensus. There's no one with a single power to say this is what we should do. There are times where we have disagreements, and as best as we can, we keep them civil and respectful and ensure that we're taking into account the pros and cons of various ideas rather than disregarding them because of who they came from. It doesn't always work that way, but we're getting better. And certainly any ideas, thoughts, and views are more than welcome on the group. As I said, it's very varied there, so feel free to throw out any ideas into that group that you might have about what MicroProfile should consider or could do differently. We're certainly open to any suggestions and improvements we can make in that respect. So with MicroProfile, how does something become a spec within the MicroProfile? So we kind of have a process outlined, and currently that process is defined through the MicroProfile evolution process repo in the Eclipse GitHub org. All proposals are essentially a pull request against that repository that uses a default template, which I'll get to in the next slide, I think. But essentially, it's recommended that any ideas that you want to propose as a specification within MicroProfile start out as a discussion thread on the Google group, because that'll get a feel for yourself as to whether there's others that might be interested in helping out working on the spec document itself and the proposal, so that you get a more varied view of what a proposal should have from the very first moment. It might save some a large amount of rework later on if there's lots of differing opinions about how it should work. So as I mentioned, there's a template we have in that repository, which is fairly short and just basically is looking for an outline of what we're looking to do. So you don't need to provide example APIs. Some of the specification proposals do, but if it's I guess it's more likely to have example APIs in the proposal if it's an existing technology that's already been implemented and you're just saying, I think we should include this in MicroProfile. If it's a whole new thing that hasn't been done before, we certainly don't expect you to be making up APIs out of thin air to say, I think this is what the API should be like. That's not what we're looking for there. The main purpose is to define a good set of use cases that are motivating the proposal, because that's where you're going to get the differing views as to whether that use case is something that MicroProfile should solve or whether it should be something that lives outside. And if possible, outline any possible solutions to solve those use cases, whether there is an existing implementation that handles most or all of those use cases. Then that could be a case of MicroProfile just providing essentially an API wrapper around an existing implementation, whether it be an open source project or something else. And then kind of the next step would be to follow up on the Google thread that you might have created initially, and then say, I've created this pull request, give me your thoughts and let me know. The pull request process itself can be a little daunting with the sheer number of messages. Now, depending on what the proposal is, you might only get a few people commenting. If it's a fairly major one, you could get a large amount of comments, and it can take a while to parse everyone's views and try and reach a consensus around various things. That's probably one part of the process we may adjust over time. We're still kind of finding our feet with that. We've only had a couple of proposals go through that whole process so far. So we're certainly open to ideas as to how to improve that. And as an author of the pull request for a proposal, you would ideally be reflecting any changes in that proposal based on discussions over a period of time, and obviously providing any reasoning as to why you don't think a particular view is beneficial or suitable for a proposal. How long this can take varies. If it's a proposal that has fairly quick and unanimous views, then within a couple of weeks it could be ready to go to the next stage. Some of the other proposals we've had have been discussed probably for a couple of months, I think, before reaching a view of, okay, we're happy for this to proceed. So yeah, as I mentioned, there can be some fairly interesting discussions, and depending on how interesting they are, it kind of dictates how long things take to happen. So once a consensus is reached, the pull request is merged, and then we go through the process of creating a GitHub repository within the Eclipse organization for any work associated with that proposal. And then you can start creating the specification document, any APIs associated with the proposal, and then a test suite as well if there is an API. It's a little confusing. People have referred to the test suite as a TCK. It's not a TCK in the JSR sense. It's just a test suite to say, for a given implementation, it fulfills the desires of the API and the specification. That's its only purpose. And obviously, to get involved with the Eclipse MicroProfile process, we have the Google group, which is where pretty much everything happens. There is an Eclipse MicroProfile site, which doesn't have a whole lot other than probably the calendar and maybe some status pages, I think, for a couple of the proposals right now. That's certainly an area we need to work on and improve. And then there's the original microprofile.io site, which probably also needs some love.
Well, it's actually interesting because, when we first launched this, it was actually, TomEE Tribe actually set up all the infrastructure for microprofile.io. And now what they're doing is they're going to set up kind of this training for how they've set it up, and a bunch of maintainers from a bunch of different organizations or individuals are all going to kind of get together and just manage the site. So it's going to go through some major revisions here really shortly, because I think the training is either next week or the week after.
Okay. So that's the main ways to get involved. And time for a shameless plug. I'm currently writing a book, Java Microservices in Action, which will use WildFly Swarm and discuss MicroProfile and microservices in general with Java. And there's a discount code there, which is not too hard to remember, for 39% off any Manning book, not just mine. I think that's it for the slides kind of section.
Yeah, we really wanted to kind of create this more interactive session as opposed to just, talking about a bunch of slides, because it's a new community. There might be lots of questions about MicroProfile itself, the community, getting involved. But just from a getting involved perspective, yeah, the easiest thing to get started with is just go start reading some of the message threads. If there's a technology there that's interesting to you, just start reading the thread and follow it through. And some of them are pretty short if there's less interest, and some of them are really long. And if it's an old thread, just add a comment and we'll start the conversation up again if there's enough interest, right? So we definitely encourage a lot of feedback. People are really professional about how we respond, right? Because, A, we're all professionals, but B, we're working together, right? It's just like if you have a coworker in the office, right? So I think a really interactive community. We all have lots of ideas, and if I disagree with Ken on something, that's not a bad thing, right? And Ken doesn't necessarily take it in a negative way, and vice versa, right? It's all about how do we reach the best end solution, and so it's a collaboration, right? It really is across multiple vendors, organizations like Java user groups, but also there's a lot of just individuals that are interested in technologies that want to get be closer to a community and be involved. So.
And in the end as well, all we're trying to do is make it easier for you guys to develop microservices with Java EE and give you all the tools you need. So we want this to succeed. All the vendors do, everyone involved does, and the more people we can get involved, the more likely it is that it will succeed and be something that everyone wants to use.
Yep. So Oracle, they've been invited. There's an interesting history there where, it's pretty public that, work on Java EE 8 had essentially stopped, right, for a long period of time. And it was one of the reasons why we all got together as a collaboration and wanted to really do a lot more work together around microservices. So, they've been invited and they're welcome to join, and we encourage them to join, right? And it's not like us versus them in any way. And it really gets back down to we are trying to innovate, and the JCP is not a place to innovate. You don't want to innovate in a standards organization, right? So we actually plan when, like I mentioned before, when we think a technology is mature enough, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Because there's still the standardization process where you can work out some wrinkles. But we plan to submit things, right? And we think that it's actually a very symbiotic relationship. So we'll have to see, if they do join MicroProfile. And we continue all to work. Oracle and all the vendors continue to work in the JCP, right? So we're all working on,
Yeah, we're still working on the JSRs that are present in Java EE 8. And if there's any proposed for 9, then we'd certainly continue to work with those. It's certainly not the case of, since we've created MicroProfile, we're not working on any JSRs at all. That's just not how it is. Yeah. If there's not other questions, are there any ideas about anything cloud native or microservice-y that...
It's just an idea of some of the things that we're
that you think we should consider, and whether you think any of these should be in a different order or higher priority than others. It's kind of the fault tolerance one.
Yeah, it's hidden in there. So there's been lots of interest from other open source projects. So they actually, I mentioned around config, right? They Apache TomEE is interested in having a config implementation. So we're actually working with other open source communities. So if you see up here a list of things and you think, well, but there's already implementations in other communities of some of these things, and that's true, but we're actually working with a lot of those communities to come to kind of a consensus about how can we all have an implementation that is compatible, with a single API, kind of in the Java EE way, so that you as users can actually use these technologies, switch them out under the hood for whatever reason, performance, stability, non-standard features that are of interest to you. Lets you switch these things out just like you would with a traditional Java EE thing, right? So,
so I guess another example of that is fault tolerance. With that one, we're looking to create an API that will work for both Hystrix and Failsafe, which is another circuit breaking open source framework that's, I think, built purely on Java EE from what I remember. Yeah.
Well, here's a question. How many of you are actually developing microservices today? Okay, a subset. How many of you using developing microservices to, using Java EE APIs? Right. See, and then that's actually kind of interesting, right? And that's what we're trying to enable. So, again, the idea is you can leverage the specifications and technologies that you know, but we're going to offer these additional frameworks and capabilities that are kind of designed for microservices. You can do it today, right? Like Adam Bean has this series of videos that he explains, here's how you can actually do microservices with Java EE APIs, and he uses concurrency utilities, and of course JAX-RS and async capabilities under the platform. But that's one way of doing it, right? Other people have come up with other ways of doing it. And so all we're looking for is kind of a common way of doing it, right? So that, again, we can have multiple implementations of these things. And there's not necessarily agreement, like, for example, with Adam's way. He does circuit breakers a certain way and bulkheads a certain way. And his bulkhead way uses EJBs, right? And so some people think, well, do we really want to do EJBs in microservices? Maybe not, right? Which is why we actually haven't included it in the baseline. But if people want to do EJBs with microservices and everyone thinks that's important enough, then we'll add it to the baseline, right? Of of MicroProfile. So we intentionally started small, and we want to leverage a lot of knowledge that's out there. So.
So the question was whether we're at MicroProfile 1.0 right now, and yes. Correct. So the question was, with MicroProfile 1.0, what would you use to write the microservice? And yes, JAX-RS would be the main one there. Right now, Servlet is technically not part of MicroProfile, even though most JAX-RS implementations rely on Servlet. So that's kind of a gray area right now, that in theory, depending on your implementation, you also have access to regular servlets to do microservice stuff. But technically, with what's available, you're looking at JAX-RS endpoints. Yeah. Yes, so right now it would be JAX-RS 2.0, and then when we move to switch to E8, it would be 2.1. And one of the nice things about JAX-RS 2.0 is it gives you the ability, the suspended thread, the @suspended, which allows you to do asynchronous programming within your JAX-RS endpoints. So the benefit of that is that whenever you get a request in, you spend the smallest amount of time saying, I want to do this work, and I want to do it in another thread. And then the HTTP request thread gets suspended, so it can process more work while the actual work's happening. And then it asynchronously says, I've completed the work either successfully or with an error, and it gets sent back asynchronously. It reactivates that HTTP request thread, responds, and goes away. So you can increase your throughput with JAX-RS by using @suspended and the async response.
Yeah, I think one other thing I'll add is that we're taking, I think, a very CDI-centric approach to the other APIs as well. Right, so JAX-RS isn't specifically CDI, but when it comes to things like configuration and circuit breakers, we're really thinking about heavily leveraging the idea of annotations and decorating your classes and injecting resources and stuff. So that was a JAX-RS example, but we're also thinking the overall programming model that we're looking at is kind of very much based on CDI.
Yeah. I guess if there's nothing further, then thank you very much for coming.
Yes, thank you.